All right, so this is a known issue with KDSS. You see how that band is rolled and it's about to come off? I may have to do some grinding to get it to sit where I want it, but we're going to see if it'll just bolt on as is. One thing I noticed about this versus the ones you can buy is that it's a little bit thicker, but it is steel and it is less than a quarter the price, so worth a shot. All right, so playing with the sway bar system, it has a big metal crimp on the far side of it, and then this is your big sway bar bushing. Pretty beefy, but there is some definite weird geometry going on with the KDSS system, and it takes a lot of force to push that link up. I had to put a pair of vice grips on my skid plate and then pry pretty hard to compress that, even though the system is currently disengaged. There's actually a lot of pressure pushing down on this, I assume from the accumulators, so that's kind of good to know. And what I'm trying to do is mount these on there like so. It fits really nice right there, but there's a bunch of plastic and rubber residue from these factory bands that were glued slash clamped on there by Toyota, and these were starting to fail. That's why I'm doing this. You see how that thing was shifting? So yeah, it's going to take a little bit of work to get this to fit right, because it fits okay right now, but when I go to put the bushing on, it takes up a lot of space. You can see how much it squirts out there, and all that extra space means that it has to be kind of in the turn. So this thing needs to kind of be not symmetrical, I think. A little grinding has been required to make it clear everything, so I notched the top of that there to help it fit underneath the bellow on the boot. You can see I got some clearance there, because remember that's going to slip. That's going to slip around and compress, so you need a decent amount of clearance there. And then I also ground this part so it can align on the bent sway bar correctly, and I grinded the bottom part to match. So you see, you grind a little bit there, that way it lets it clock appropriately onto the sway bar. I'm going to try to bolt it up now and see how it works. It also makes it a lot easier to disconnect the other side. You can see what I did over there. See how there's a big gap? I disconnected the other side just to give me some more to work with, and I realized, look how far this thing can drop down once you have the other side disconnected. So I'm probably going to do that spacer on the other side, just to keep everything a little happier once I add a little more lift. Because right now there was a lot of force being pushed down by this bar, even with the KDSS relays disconnected. So that's another nail in the coffin for the KDSS mod, is how much force it takes to actually compress this cylinder, even with the accumulators valves open. This system is not designed for high-speed stuff. So the easiest thing to do would be not remove this bushing, but I was experimenting, so I did. You can put a jack stand under the sway bar right here, and then let the weight of the truck down to hold it up a little bit to make it easier to work with. But you obviously want this fully clamped down before you install your ring, your positioning ring. And then once you get this fully clamped down, you can pick the ring against it, tap the ring a little bit with a hammer as you're tightening it down, and it'll all line up pretty good. So I did some extra work to kind of play with the bushings. I want to take this bushing apart and see the condition of it. It's like in about brand new condition, but definitely there's an order of operations here. So unhooking that side helps, and then you definitely want to use a floor jack and a jack stand combination like this, because there's a lot of stiffness in all these bushings here, and there is some wonky geometry. So yeah, get this tightened if you're putting new bushing, get that all solid, and then take this, incrementally tap it and tighten it against there, and it'll all come out pretty straight. All right, so this side is installed. I just need to do the other side. The other side's a little easier. You don't have to grind the top clamp because there's no cylinder over there. As you can see, that's how it's aligned right there. It's doing its job of keeping the arm from sliding around. It's not perfectly flush, but it's never going to be because the pipe bends as it comes out of the bushing. So that kind of part of it is what it is. But it's on there good, torqued very nicely, and it should be pretty strong. So now I just got to do the other side the same way pretty much. Fun, fun, fun. It would have been easier to remove my skid plate, but I didn't do it at first, and now I'm working around it. But if I was going to do it again, I would definitely have removed the skid plate. Here's the passenger side done. That was a lot easier because I already done the other side. I knew exactly where to grind. Fits on there pretty nice. Now that lower link on both sides is trapped between the factory crimp band and that split ring, so it's not going to go anywhere. Very premium. Install is much easier. All you need is a pair of dikes, an Allen wrench or hex wrench, and your double split ring. These are 1 3/16. Rear sway bar is smaller, obviously, like everything else. And on the rear, it's extremely simple. These are directly bolt on. There's no grinding required. You just come down here. I'll try to do this with one hand for you. A pair of dikes. Cut the factory band. It's like a little tiny CV boot band, like that. And then peel off this factory retainer. There it is installed. I left a little bit of gap so it has some flexibility to rock around some and slide some, because the factory retainer there was rubber, so that would have deformed. This is not going to deform. It's locked on there really solid. It's a little bit of work to scrape these things off. You can see there's some glue there. So I just grabbed it with a pair of needle nose and yanked it off in kind of little pieces, and then took a razor blade and scraped it off to make it fairly clean. But you can install these rears in 10 minutes for both sides. So definitely do the rear, really easy mod. If you don't want to do the grinding I did on the front, you could buy the solution offered by some of the KDSS so-called gurus out there, which I think is pretty overpriced, but maybe the best bet if you don't do any grinding is to buy these $20 rings for the rear and the $80 rings from that website for the front. That way you don't have to do any grinding. But this was easy enough for me. And now I don't have to worry about these links shifting around under the extra articulation that is available due to my extended travel Dobinson rear shocks. I might eventually drop the sway bar down, but I'm kind of hesitant to do it. I don't want it to hang down any farther, and when you drop that sway bar down, it really makes this bracket hang down to about here. And the truck's jacked up right now, so I don't want my sway bar hanging down any more than it needs to. So I'm probably going to leave the rear alone. I might do the spacer up front because it doesn't cost me anything, because I already have the skid plate that allows for the spacer. So I might as well do the spacer up front. But I think I'm going to leave the rear the way it is right here. The rear flex is pretty damn good. So also a quick update from my KDSS video. I cleaned up the mod by removing the voltmeter and adding this nice custom switch, KDSS override button. And as soon as I turn the wheel and the relay locks up, it turns the light on the switch on, which I think is very helpful to know when you're driving around how often you're actually using your KDSS override, or you would be using it. To disengage the system, I just press the switch, which disengages that fuse, and now the light will never come on because the KDSS computer is unpowered. Very cool and simple and clean.